Hi, this is Khalil Golivala. Welcome to another episode of BIPOC Manager podcast. In today's episode, I'm really excited to have Tara Small with us. Tara works with Feminuti as a bilingual consultant and facilitator. Tara fuels her work in DEI by believing the world is made up of beautiful people with beautiful minds, and the learning to lead into our differences with respect benefits all of us. Tara holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in criminology and women's studies. She's supported organizations through structural changes and capacity shifts with almost a decade of experience in nonprofit and grassroots sector. Adding her inclusive and equity-based approach to processes has contributed to the growth and development of the teams Tara has worked with. Through her personal, academic, and professional journeys, coinciding at unique intersections where she thrives as a Black woman, Tara works to empower and learn alongside folks on how a more equitable world can come to be. Tara lives in the South Shore of Montreal and cares for amazing West Indian parents. Tara, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Tara. One of the things I love give the kind of floor to you, Tara, is, in a lot of conversations about, and BIPOC, such a huge word, Black, Indigenous persons of color. But again, there are notions also of immigration and movement, right? How long have people
Mhm.
exist? And what I love to talk about you is about that experience of being the child of immigrants, specifically the role that some children can play. I mean, you might have played in bridging the world of your parents and the new society. So can you speak more of your experience growing up and how that shaped you?
Yeah, awesome. For those of you who will connect with me after, you'll see I'm very proud about my West Indian and Caribbean heritage. So my mom is from Grenada and my dad is from Barbados, and they both immigrated to Canada, both on work visas, and ended up becoming citizens. However, as you shared, I'm in the South Shore of Montreal, so we are in the French part of Canada, and for them, that was yet another barrier that was in place. And I think when I was younger, I didn't really understand the differences I was noticing, but um, I would see how my parents would get treated differently. First off, because my dad is dark skinned and my mom is lighter than me. So I would see the difference in treatment that my dad would get versus the treatment my mom would get. But also being in Quebec, you have to go to school in French unless your parents went to school in English to high school, I believe, out here. So I was in French immersion until high school. And because I was bilingual and my parents weren't and still aren't, I would be able to hear the people talk about my parents in front of my parents and realizing that they think they can just speak and make certain claims or make certain initial assumptions. But they wouldn't assume that I spoke French. So already that little I didn't understand how language was being used in a way to kind of keep my parents away or keep my parents on the outside. And when you're a young kid, there's all these feelings. And I was like, this is just weird, but I guess this is how it is. And now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of systemic and structural things in place to really ostracize and marginalize the immigrant community. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I think noticing those differences, that was definitely the first thing, and noticing how people would just treat and just body language as well. Those were things I noticed, and that stuck with me throughout my life to the point that now my observation skills are pretty good when I step into a new space.
Yeah, and I can imagine that because one of the things I focus on is that when I was in university, we were studying education, and the notion is that for any society, they see sort of the schooling system as almost it's quasi indoctrination, but it's quasi producing its citizens who share its values. And so I always find it
Hmm.
interesting for people who maybe, again, either the young kids who come into the system, because they're kind of got their feet in both worlds. On one hand, they're being, maybe I use a stronger word, indoctrinated into something they're forming a Canadian, Quebec, South Shore citizen. But at the same time, they're also seeing how that same system is treating other members of its own body. Like it
Yes.
wants it, but it rejects it. It keeps it close, but excludes it. Right.
Yes. And that's that like duality or those two sides of it is something once again when I was younger I remember in my body just feeling it, and it was funny because as much as the system was telling us how separate we were or how it's like you gotta kind of figure it out and go with the masses even though you will still be treated differently, because no matter what I am still under that BIPOC umbrella, and someone did decide that it's going to be white and BIPOC. It's not like white folks don't have an acronym. White folks don't have a like a an umbrella term that they use for their community necessarily to the extent that we have now been using BIPOC. But I also had it in the reverse in that my parents I would say they accepted what they had to of the system, but they still rejected in a lot of ways. So I remember being told time and time again that my household is a Caribbean household. And in this household, there's a certain way we do things. And when you leave the household, you're in Canada, and that's a different world. So I even remember being a kid growing up, and when I'm in my house is my cultural safe haven, and it feels like home, and it feels like where I should be. And then I have to kind of suit up when I leave my house, because outside your house, that's Canada. And that's kind of how my parents started to teach me that there is going to be a difference in your treatment. Yes, you're born here. Yes, you're raised here. However, you're still going to be treated differently because of where your parents and your family comes from. So noticing that kind of like, okay, there's two sides to the same coin, and I'm somewhere in the middle and trying to navigate that once again at a young age. It was something that I didn't really understand the gravity, but now that I'm older, I realize my parents really prepared me to kind of hold my heritage near and dear and essentially not let Canada strip it away so I can be, what is it, indoctrinated, you said, into into the system.
I mean, a lot of times think of education, I think of like, the Stanford prison experiments, Milgram, because that's, I think it was, I forgot what it was, it might have been François Dolto. The notion is that, it's a French psychologist, where you've got kids, and essentially what what the state does really is produce its own type of citizens, which is what
Hmm.
fear of immigration, because it's almost that sort of like, are they really going to become one of us, whatever that us is, or are they going to be sort of
Hmm.
agents?
Yeah.
I feel like that battle in some sense is so much about the children, right? You know, what are the values they're seeing, what are they doing? Like I remember when because I learned French in Montreal, in Quebec when I came here, and through like the Quebec Citizen, which I'm happy about, I'm proud about it. But I remember one class, one of the topics was a child going to his mother and explaining what recycling was, because wherever this parent had come from, there was no recycling. And I remember being an immigrant, being like, "What the hell is recycling?" You know,
Yeah.
this is a way of almost being taught into what the kind of values and systems are. But if I could take something, Taurus, it seems like on one hand, your parents are kind of, it's important to again keep that cultural heritage, right? But there,
Mhm.
I can ask you, what was that balance like? Because again, you've got, it's Caribbean household being strong, with your roots being strong, your background, but there's such thing as sort of as Canada out there. If and being as simplistic as possible, was it seen as sort of a sharp divide, or was it maybe more like a spectrum? Because I can imagine it's very spectrum, right, between the two worlds.
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think it's a both and. I think with my parents, when it was communicated with my from my with and like by my parents, it there was that sharp divide. Like even in public, if we're going grocery shopping, if I was with my mom and there was children acting a certain way and they did not appear to be from West Indian heritage, she would point and tell me, you see,
Yeah.
that we don't do stuff like that. So even when I was in public, there was still like, if I'm around my parents, there's a bubble of, okay, we're still kind of in the Caribbean, and observe the world that you're in because the world is othering you. So we're gonna kind of act as such. However, I was lucky in that I grew up with a lot of other folks who had West Indian parents or Caribbean parents and are kids who are born here. So I think that's where the spectrum piece kind of comes in. Because with my parents, there's the sharp divide, but with the kids of the parents, we are all kind of like, yeah, we get what our parents are saying, but like, come on, like, we're in Canada. So that's where I would kind of notice that leniency, but I still had that sense of community because there were certain things that we were either not allowed to do or certain things that we were doing because we were Caribbean. And then once I was like in the classroom in front of the teacher at my desk, oh, j'étais Canadienne. I was Canadian as Canadian could be, except for in high school when there was the month of our country fair when we had like a world country fair. But when I was in front of, like when I was in class, when I was in front of my coaches, when I was in front of extracurricular activities like the leaders for that, I was Canadian. With my friends, I was a little bit more lenient. With my parents, I was Caribbean.
Really?
So it was fun to navigate as a child. Um, and I'm grateful for it because I realized that it made me that I think that's how I kind of got curious with perspectives, because I noticed that depending on the space I'm in and depending on who I'm around and depending on what I'm doing, my identity kind of morphs into what is needed. But then the older I got, I kind of realized that that was Probably also like some type of survival like tactic in that what is most appropriate in what situation, recognizing that white folks probably don't have to worry about that. They just show up as they wish. Um, so I would say with my parents, there's a sharp divide with like school and institutions, sharp divide, but with the community I was building for myself, that's where there was that leniency, and I would kind of bounce back and forth and arguably create my own personal identity and not kind of like, oh, I'm Caribbean because my parents told me so, or oh, I'm Canadian because that's what I'm learning at school. Like, who is Tara? I kind of explored that with my friends.
And so now, just Clara, as you mentioned, it's just put context as well. Imagine for any kind of parent, any family, this sense of like, this is our family, this is who we are as this tribe over here, and it could be
Mhm.
political, could be geographic, could be linguistic. So
Yeah.
meaning it's not just one group of people; everybody has this, right? This is our
Yeah.
family, and that's society outside, and we're gonna try and help the family navigate those two spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like the added layer of the French was another complexity because my parents would kind of I think you and I chatted about this when we connected previously, but they would use me as their in-house translator at the ripe age of like 7, 8, 9. I was on the phone with government agencies when they didn't have a bilingual employee and on the phone explaining to my mom very complicated things and trying to translate them over into English. And then she would obviously have questions. So I'd have to translate that into French and then doing the whole back and forth. Or even my dad, I remember he was a landlord for a bit. He had a small multi-unit property, and anytime he had to go talk to his tenants, he would bring me. So like little 9-year-old, 10-year-old Tara was there explaining to people that their rent is being increased or asking them if their bathroom is okay because my dad is going to be retiling bathrooms and he would like things that I had no business. Like, why am I 10 years old trying to figure out what's going on with lease and properties and tax forms and all this stuff? But the reality is, my parents don't speak French and I do, and we need to get this done. So that was another thing that I realized was kind of like it was my role when I was younger, and I didn't realize how much weight that carried. At the time because I just thought, oh, my parents don't speak French. But then now I have that understanding like, wow, if I didn't help them out, there were some things that simply would not have gotten done, or they would have had to spend more money to get that support. But that was definitely one thing that I noticed was that added layer of French being in Quebec and how um, kids of immigrants, we have to figure that out.
Yeah, I get when I hear you speak to her, I keep thinking from the image that pops up is of a bridge again and again. Like that again is because you go through the system, like I said, that someone was an immigrant who arrived. No one gave me a pamphlet that says here are all the different government bodies you can talk to or check out or speak to. But it was for me, it's going through that French language program. I was suddenly made aware of all the different services that I
Mhm.
did, but in a way that for like my wife who is Francophone Quebec and my kids who are again kids in the system, they're being surrounded by it all their life. They're aware of these things. Like you mentioned, talking to these these government bodies, being that
Yeah.
between both parents. Um, but one thing, Tara, I see this coming more and more. I see this young person, helping a family out, speaking French, all that. And I just see that connection between who you are now, speaking, studying criminology, was that ever a conscious thing? Do you think that kind of just like fell through as part of just your experience as a child?
Um, I think, oh, that's a good question. Ooh, that's making me excited. I think it was naturally, um, so I was raised as an only child, so always had to kind of entertain myself or keep myself busy, or if I was playing with my parent, like I'm playing with adults. So I was always kind of just like the one kid around the adults. Um, and I was just very curious as a child. My dad would tell me like joke and say he would say I had the whys because every question it was why and why, and it was just simply because I wanted to learn. I just wanted to understand. Um and I think my parents did a really good job of working on like my confidence when I was younger. So I was just naturally outspoken, and if something wasn't fair, and then someone told me that the reason why it was like that is just because that's how it's always been, that never sat right with me, period. Like, you can't just tell me something's unfair and that's just how it is, and then I'm going to keep moving on. So that was always like just in me. And then when I was younger, I wanted to, my limited understanding of the policing system, I wanted to be a police officer because I believed at the time that police officers were the most noble people in society and helping folks out. So I was like, that's what I want to do. Then I quickly learned that there is a risk of physical harm. So I was like, oh, let me be a lawyer because lawyers will, they work with police officers. So I'm kind of adjacent. Then in university, or not in university, sorry, in CEGEP, I had like some criminal law seminar or something. And after I realized how the law was written and how it can be applied and how you can work your way through certain things, I was like, that's not for me. I think I'm higher level than that. And then that's when I learned about essentially sociology and criminology. So it was always there. I just had to figure out what it was exactly for me. And I was lucky in that I went to University of Ottawa and they're a critical criminology school. So critical crim is essentially just looking at oppressive systems, all of them. Yes, the criminal justice system, but looking at all oppressive systems and looking at the impact. So that really just spearheaded me into the nonprofit space. It spearheaded me into community work. And I also just think that I have a passion in me, and it's just to try and make things a little bit better. Throughout university, I was shocked. Like, I'm really blessed in that my parents were able to fully support me all the way through grad school. But then the more I was in university, the more I would see people deciding, am I buying my books? Am I buying food? Am I paying my tuition or am I paying rent? And noticing that there's so many people in university that, even as big as university is and how much of a responsibility that is, there are people who are trying to figure out when their next meal, how are they caring for their kids, whatever it may be. So I started my own scholarship fund because I was like, I'm here comfortable because I have my parents' support, and so many people don't have it. And the university is just like, well, tuition's still a couple $1,000s, so figure it out. So I started my own my own scholarship fund to support folks. I just think it's always been in me that, like, when something doesn't make sense or it's not working for people, like, oh, just because this is the way it is, like that, I never agreed with that. So I think it was a combination of me listening to my natural interests and also being blessed enough to have parents that were okay with me exploring what it was I wanted to do.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tara, as we kind of wrap up the episode, one of the things that maybe if you have any opinions on it is, any advice for like recent immigrants who are kind of raising their kids in a new environment?
Ooh, any advice? Um, One, for recent immigrants with children, show yourselves grace. Your kids see how hard you're working. Your kids can tell that it is tough and it's a lift, and Canada or Quebec is not necessarily as inclusive as it comes to be. So I would say show yourself grace and rest. Your kids will not be upset at you for doing that, even though you might feel guilty or what have you. I say that because I wish my parents kind of rested a bit more too. Because I remember as a kid, like, okay, like, I can tell you guys are working hard. You don't have to prove it to me as well as trying to prove it to the country. So I'd say rest and care for yourself. Um, Honestly, I would encourage you, and this is just unbiased, I would encourage you to try, if you're not comfortable with French, to try doing the French homework with your kids and just learn the basics. Like, learn the my dad knows merci, he knows the days of the week, and he knows numbers. And it's funny because that actually ended up helping me sometimes, because if someone would call him and give him a number, he would be able to write it down for me so I can call them back. And like my parents did, hold on to your culture. I kind of like that my parents told me my household was Caribbean and outside was Canada. I kind of really appreciated that, because then when I would go into other people's households, I'd be like, "Oh, this is the German household. Or like, oh, I go to my Portuguese friend's house. Oh, this is a Portuguese household. And then kind of appreciating different cultures through that lens, I would definitely say hold on to your culture, make it the forefront. And my one thing I was grateful for, my parents were honest. They didn't come from the lens of one day Canada will fully accept you. They came from the lens of Canada has a pretty nasty history, and the repercussions of that history are still at play today. So you have to try and be as informed and as confident as possible when you're navigating this system. And I think that kind of humanized and kind of alleviated a pressure that I felt for my parents to like essentially be the great Canadian citizen because my parents didn't immigrate here for me to just like do nothing. I think with them kind of just saying like, hey, Canada has their own problems too. It alleviated the pressure. So I would definitely say explore some French basics, but that's just I'm biased because my parents did it. Really keep that at home. This is our culture. Show yourself some grace and rest as parents because you deserve it and you came here for whatever reason. And you're doing the best you can with what you have for your kids, and your kids can see that. Um, yeah, and I think those are the first ones that come to mind, but also recognize that Canada is benefiting more by you being here. And kind of putting that power back in your hand and in your family. I think that can go a long way.
Making terror. And so before we wrap up, is there anything you'd want to mention? Anything you'd want to highlight?
Um, let's see. Nothing particular, just, kindness is free. We're all struggle bussing through the world as the world gets ready to evict us, deservingly so. But I would just say be kind, especially say something kind to your body, and be curious. I think recognizing that all of us, when we're out in the world and we're just kind of going on about our days, that we all have complex lives at home. We all have different needs. I think just that curiosity as well and leaning into it and recognizing that all of our differences make us stronger can be quite the game changer. And then lastly, be gentle with yourself. There's a lot going on in the world, and unfortunately, some of us don't have the power to change it all at the drop of a hat. So be kind with yourself and do the best you can. Yeah.
Amazing, Tara. And so lastly, if anyone wants to find out more about you or or like the scholarship that you run, what's the best way they can find that information?
Yeah, so for me, I would say LinkedIn or Instagram. So LinkedIn, I'm Tara Small, and you'll see my profile pop up. And then on Instagram, I am Tara Marissa S. So TaraMarissas. And then you can DM me or you can direct message me. And even if it's just for like a coffee chat or anything, and I would be happy to connect. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being a guest today, Tara.
Thank you so much for having me.